like you said, I'm Heather. So good day from Australia. So that should cover all different aspects of time of day. The Australian Data Archive as a trusted repository for research and data sharing. During this RDA Global Adoption Week, I'm going to give you a quick background of what the Australian Data Archive is, the reasons that we undertook the Core Trust Seal, or at that time it was the Data Seal of Approval in the World Data System joint venture, and the outcomes and our next steps. So the Australian Data Archive was started back in 1981 at the ANU in the Research School of Social Sciences with a mission to collect and preserve Australian social science research data. We still have the same mission, but we are now in the Centre for Social Research and Methods at the Australian National University. We hold over 5,000 data sets from around 1,500 studies. We are sourced from academic, government, and private sector and NGO. So you can see here some of the data holdings that we do hold. We hold panel data, we hold health data, we hold longitudinal data, we hold sensitive data, and we hold it on a varied and variety of topics. Anything that can pretty much fit into the social sciences will be found in our archive. So who are our community group or our users? We have over 2,500 new users each year. And in 2019, we had 25,000 data file downloads. These were from undergraduates, postgraduates, academic researchers, the media, government, and NGO sectors. Predominantly, we are covering the Australian universities, but we do have some international university users in there as well as government departments in their new ventures to share data are finding it useful to go through the Australian Data Archive. So I'll move on to the Core Trust Seal now. So the Core Trust Seal was undertaken as a project with the Australian National Data Service, or ANS, which is now the Australian Research Data Commons, and the ARDC is a member of the RDA. So we used this opportunity with ANS or ARDC to undertake the Core Trust Seal and see how it was for our archive, as well as how it fit for the Australian context for the social sciences. So this work, as I said, was undertaken in a joint venture with ANS and had multiple phases. We did contracting with ANS. We did the assessing of our criterion for what started out as the Data Seal of Approval. We assessed what documents we actually had at that time and which ones were in the public domain and which ones were out of the public domain. We were already a close to 40-year-old archive at that time, but many of our applications and policies were not in the public domain. We also assessed what could be safely and legally placed into the public domain. We also assessed the agreements with our outsourced partners and tried to figure out how to demonstrate some of these, as some of these we didn't have a solid agreement. We just had an within university agreement. We completed the Core Trust Seal application and assessment, which took multiple toing and froing with our assessors, but we got there in the end. And then we have outlined some changes that needed to be implemented by the end of that to ensure that we were fair, safe, and have continued certification. So the challenges we found in our process undertaking the Core Trust Seal was there was a complex interplay between the guidelines and the relevant documents, and trying to figure out which document needed to be placed in more than one guideline or not at all. We also had to figure out how to provide the evidence from things that weren't necessarily in the public domain, and if they needed to be in the public domain, the safest way to put them there. We also needed to figure out what constituted a risk management assessment, as we had done risk management through our university, but this assessment was not available or visible from outside sources. We have also had the challenge of determining the in-process timelines of implementation for each of the guidelines. If you didn't have something in the full implemented phase, you needed to provide a timeline. And we really needed to negotiate within our own organization what was going to be a realistic and reliable timeline for putting some of these implements in place. So 9 of our 16 guidelines required some edits during the process. Some of these were just updating web links. Some were actually updating our website. Many of the external outsourced partners, their web links fell off the radar while we were undertaking the application. So some of the changes that we implemented at the Australian Data Archive. We determined that our platform that we had been currently using, the Nestar platform, was no longer going to meet our needs within the Core Trust Seal certification process. So we decided to change to a Dataverse platform, which is run out of Harvard. So we now have a community-based Dataverse platform, and we also updated our website. So our website predominantly only includes static links, and then our Dataverse platform is where all of our data is. We also had to update a lot of our documentation due to changing from our Nestar to Dataverse platform. We also changed some of our service platforms for our repository, such as we implemented Oz ticketing system to help us track the tickets or the applications through Dataverse and through our email. So this is what our new website looks like. It has a link to our Dataverse account as well. Then each aspect in the Dataverse account has a dataset page, and each one of those, like in Nestar, still has DDI documentation for all of its metadata. There are data and document files available for all of our studies. There is metadata available in the form of DDI for abstracts, data collection types, other aspects, authors' names. There's also a terms and conditions of use and access requirements tab that lays out the legal framework of what you are agreeing to. And there's also a versioning step in Dataverse, which was very handy and helpful. Also, the DOI is minted in Dataverse, and a citation is given as the example is below. So this is what the front page of the Australian Data Archive Dataverse looks like, and that's the link for it, dataverse.ada.edu.au. And you can search on multiple different aspects in there to find all of the data that we hold. And all of the Nestar data has been moved into our Dataverse account now. So inside Dataverse, you will actually see that we have the options of having completely open access, so that you can just download without having to log into Dataverse. So mostly we just have download for documentation and acknowledgements and freely available publications. But some data sets are starting to go to an open data set as well. We are still working with this on agreements and licensure. Most of our data sets are still request access because they are mediated access. So we still at least want to know who is using it. Then this will, once you put in a request, it will link to our Oz ticket and send us an email notification saying that there is a application waiting. It will also send the user an application, a copy of their application. So the benefits that we have found from undertaking the Core Trust Seal was it really gave us a time to reflect on ourselves and have a refinement of our own processes, policies, and procedures. Even though we were almost a 40-year-old archive, we hadn't taken that new perspective that the Core Trust Seal had given us the opportunity to take. So we refined our processes, our policies, and procedures. We've looked at international standards and international compliances. We had trust from a core set of users previously, but this really gave us the opportunity to grow that trust to other user communities and other contributors that may not have looked at the Australian Data Archive before. It's also given us a network of users from internationally through the RDA. So it has also given us the ease of access to information for those people who are thinking of contributing to the archive, of what kind of information we need from their ethics, their grants, their participant information. It also gives users that same information to allow them the idea if they want to use that data set. And this really relates back to the data lifecycle and the data management plans that researchers and government bodies are very keen on implementing. So our next steps, we're going to continue to develop our new functionalities of a self-deposit Dataverse, which is ensuring fair and trust principles, and integrating that self-deposit Dataverse with our forward-facing production Dataverse. We are working with new collaborators and on new collaborations all the time. Some of these are mapping gray materials to data that already exists in our data archive, such as was mentioned in another study in this RDA Adoption Week. We are also looking at all of the implications of open data access, so completely open, not having a mediated access, and which data sets that is safe and viable for, and which ones it is definitely not safe and viable for. Some of our data is very, very restricted, very sensitive data, so it can never actually go to a fully open data access plan. It will need to be mediated as we need to know who is utilizing it. We're also working with API access, so both for deposit access, running Shiny applications, and R applications. We're also looking at shibboleth authentication for university users and ORCID identification integration. So further steps to take. We're still rapidly assessing all of our business rules for refining business rules with our current users and future users. We are also refining the outsourced partner agreements and arrangements that we have in place. As I said, many of these are within a university, so are more on a gentleman's handshake or met within a university context. So trying to find ways that we can solidify those. We are also working with the approvals of management in Dataverse and linking this to our Oz tickets so that our communications between the ADA, our users, and our data owners are managed and utilized in a safe and effective way. We are finding ways to link into the FAIR principles and the 5 safe models to help streamline our access and our utilization of data. We're also undertaking and keeping compliant on licensing in terms of use. We are looking at other repositories around. We're looking to RDA, finding out the most relevant and most recent compliances and making sure that we can still engage with those. We are also looking to make sure our provenance, so our metadata tabs and our controlled vocabularies are meeting international standards and standards within the Australian context. We do have a few controlled vocabularies, but we're working to solidify quite a few of these. We're also trying to keep abreast of the common standards, such as the Data Documentation Initiative. Our supervisor, Steve McEachran, is very active in the DDI community. And we're also, of course, looking for recertification coming up in February of next year. So that is it for my presentation. But if you have any further questions or you would like to come and see our Dataverse or our website, please have a look. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Control back, Brian. Thanks, Heather. I'll leave the control to you just for a few minutes while you when you're answering any questions. Thanks for that. That was really interesting. So as I was saying earlier, to anybody who wants to ask a question, feel free to submit it in the questions box. We have one question so far for you, Heather. So this is from Leah Stukhar, who asks, for ADA, do you use DDI for all studies?
Yes, we currently use DDI for all studies. And we used DDI back in our NestStar implementation as well. And we have carried that forward. I can't think off the top of my head which DDI standard we are up to in our Dataverse, but we are definitely keeping abreast of DDI. And I know DDI is also doing some new implementations to make it a broader application for all areas.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. So far, I don't see any other questions yet. I'll just give it a couple of seconds if anyone's typing a last minute question in. or if anyone has their hand raised, which I'll just check. No, so nobody has their hand raised so far. Oh, and we have another question. So this is from Gwen Moncoif. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Who asks, how much time and resource did it take to get to the stage you're at?
Well, that's a very complex question because each archive has a different level of knowledge or a different level of availability of the documentations that may be needed. It took us a bit longer because we did find many of our documents were inwards facing. And at that time, we were also starting it under the Data Seal of Approval World Data System joint venture, which has now become the Core Trust Seal. So it did take a bit longer while that teething process was being worked out as well. So it did take us almost a year from when we initiated to when we were awarded our seal of approval. But that process is getting faster now that they actually have a better board and larger pool of people to review. Our next review is due in February, I think it is, and we've started to undertake the assessment already, but we're only working on it an hour a week right now, looking if there's anything that we need to have updated from last time that we haven't updated to this time, or making sure web links are viable.
Perfect. Okay. So one more question. So this is from Alice Freeman, who asks, what is the most valuable advice you would give, you would have liked to know before applying to Core Trust Seal?
Was to know what can safely be and what is in the public domain. So that takes the longest, is figuring out what aspects, policies, procedures, things of your archive are already in the public domain. Because, like I said, we were a very established archive and we had trust with our current users, but many of our documents were only internally facing for our own processing procedures. But these did need to actually be externally facing so that users understood and the assessors could understand what exactly we were doing.
Okay, perfect. Thanks,
and I think
Heather.
also understanding who your user group is as well. If your user groups or your governments or your institutions want you to have this trust. If so, then it's a good thing to undertake.